Chapter 4. Way Out. Atop the stairs leading down into the danger below, the man froze, lowering his gun loosely at his side in a momentary surrender to his nerves. He stood still, listening to the echo of his own fear, letting it consume him for a moment before his entire body tensed, rigid and combat-ready. The tension melted, only to return in waves as he tensed and relaxed in a ritual of self-control. With a sharp inhale, he struck his chest a couple of times with quick, deliberate punches, grounding himself. Once more in control, he raised his gun and, with quiet precision, began his descent down the steps. Returning to the door he had failed to barricade earlier, he noted with some relief that it appeared undisturbed. No one had tried to open it, yet, but that only meant the sick could still be waiting, just beyond the threshold. His mind flickered to the flimsy barrier he had quickly thrown together at the stairwell. There was no way it had held. He wasn't counting on it. He gently pulled the door open with one hand, while the other guided the shotgun through the gap, its barrel sweeping the room from left to right. So far, it was clear. With steady motion and unwavering vigilance, he stepped inside. The room was clear, with only the 3 dead sick from earlier lying still. A quick glance at the barricade showed it had held. The desk had shifted slightly, but not enough to let them through. Feeling a flush of silent relief, he crept closer to spy through the window in the door. Black stains covered the glass from the other side, signs of the sick trying to force their way in. On the stairs outside, a single sick man sat hunched and defeated, as if worn out by its efforts. The grim scene brought a fleeting sense of quiet relief at not being met with immediate hostility. Stepping away from the door, he took a moment to assess his situation and devise a plan to clear the stairwell. He recalled the debris on the roof and thought it might offer a way to make noise, drawing the sick out of the stairwell and hopefully out into the open. With renewed focus, he turned back to investigate the potential advantage above. Silently leaving the room, he slightly eased off the need for stealth once the door was shut. He hastened back to the stairs, his attention shifting to the rooftop. Scanning the area, he spotted a small junction box on the floor next to the antenna. It had come loose, but was still connected by a long length of cable. The sight of it, along with other scattered debris, suggested a potential way to create a noise that might lure the sick out of the stairwell. He bent down, picking up the small junction box and tugging gently on the cable it was attached to. Carefully, he reeled in the slack, coiling it into a manageable bundle. The line led back to the solar array's distribution box, still firmly connected. Satisfied for now, he set the box and bundled cable down. Pacing the rooftop, he intuitively knew from his approach that the stairwell entrance wasn't far from the distribution box. Sure enough, after a quick glance over the ledge, he spotted it almost immediately. Grabbing the junction box and the coiled cable, he began to measure it out, estimating by rule of thumb that each floor of the building was roughly 10 feet. With over 40 feet of cable, it should almost reach the ground floor. He carefully lowered the bundle over the ledge, mindful to avoid hitting any windows along the way. But to his disappointment, the end stopped short, falling just above the ground floor. However, it lined up with a row of windows close to the entrance. "What choice do I have?" he muttered under his breath. With a sigh, he began to just as carefully reel the cable back up, neatly bundling them once again before placing them down by the ledge. His eyes scanned the rooftop for anything else he could use. Moving quickly, he found a loose aircon fan grid, a folding chair, and a small set of step ladders, each one offering potential. One by one, he collected them, bringing them to the edge of the roof. With the makeshift arsenal gathered, he was ready to spring his distraction. Picking up the bundle and box, he began testing the arc of his throw a couple of times. Satisfied, he lowered them back to his side, rolling his shoulders in a few quick shrugs to loosen up. Taking a deep breath, he got into position, bracing himself. With a sharp heave, he swung the bundle back and launched it forward with all the force he could muster. The cable unspooled mid-air, straightening as it plummeted in an arc toward the building and smashed through a window with a loud crash. Upon hearing the startled groans of the alerted sick, a confusing mixture of dread and accomplishment washed over him. Shaking it off, he grabbed the stepladder, waited a few more seconds, and tossed it off the ledge toward the stairwell entrance. The loud metallic clatter echoed below. Without hesitation, he picked up the aircon grid, pausing for a moment before launching it in the same direction. The rising noise from the chaos below confirmed it was working better than he had hoped. Curiosity got the better of him. He cautiously peered over the edge with one eye, careful not to create a silhouette. Below, he counted 7 of them, scattered and searching. One had fallen from the broken window, lying motionless and seemingly incapacitated. Satisfied with the chaos, he grabbed the folding chair and walked further down the roof. With a quick heave, he launched it well clear of the entrance. Almost instantly, the sound of impact was met with startled cries and the heavy footfalls of the sick, shambling in pursuit of the noise. The man wasted no time, casting a quick glance over the rooftop one last time before moving with urgency back to the barricaded door. He peered through the window, straining to see if it was clear. The stairwell was eerily silent. He held his breath, hoping the distraction had worked as well as it seemed. With silent strength, he carefully levered the desk just enough to slip through the door. He opened it steadily, his shotgun leading the way. Every movement was deliberate. This was no time for mistakes. As he reached the top of the stairwell, he peeked down to the ground floor. To his relief, it was empty. Aware now that he might be surrounded by airborne RCB, he made a firm mental note to avoid touching anything. He pressed onward down the stairs as silently as his gear would allow. Fresh blood and black smears stained the walls, evidence of the recent chaos. The entrances to each floor were closed by their swing mechanisms, but he kept only a peripheral eye on the darkened spaces within as he passed. Upon reaching the ground floor, he slipped into cover by the open entrance and listened intently. It sounds clear, he thought, and with cautious precision he began to sweep his way out, aiming and ready, while slowly emerging into the daylight, his eyes adjusting to the brightness. Squinting against the daylight, his eyes adjusted to reveal a carpet of shattered glass underfoot. "Idiot," he mentally scolded himself. Glancing to the left, he saw one of the sick, standing still, its back turned as if its interest in the last sound had faded. Turning his attention ahead, he noticed the one that had fallen from the window was slowly stirring, face down. Carefully, he began picking his way through the broken glass, placing each step with precision as he moved away from the building, heading in the direction of the main gate. Step by step, nearly free of the broken glass, he paused at every muffled crunch beneath his boots. The boundary wall of the safe zone was just ahead. Behind him, the incapacitated figure began muttering and sobbing, "Emma, come back. Please come back." He forced himself to shut it out, closing his heart to it. This was not a time for empathy or sympathy of any kind. Now at the wall, free of the glass and the open space, he quickened his pace, moving along the perimeter toward the gate. Suddenly, a loud, rasping yell from behind stopped him in his tracks. He spun around to see the previously incapacitated, sick man, now on his knees, eyes locked onto him with a hollow, desperate gaze. Heart pounding, he didn't wait for it to rise. Instinct kicked in, and he broke into a sprint toward the gate. As his boots pounded the ground, more yells and hurried footsteps echoed from behind, closing in. In what was easily the most desperate situation he'd faced in recent memory, he sprinted out into the middle of the safe zone grounds, fully exposed. About halfway to the gate, he tossed his bag to the ground, spinning into a kneel. With the shotgun raised, he fought to steady his aim, working to control his breath, knowing the slightest shake could throw him off. 7 of them were now rounding the corner at different paces, but all closing in fast. Twitching his right hand toward the pistol at his side, he saw the sick nearing range, now visible in horrifying detail. A few seconds ticked by as he fired 5 shots at the closest targets, the gunfire echoing through the safe zone. He lunged to his feet, tossing the empty shotgun aside, and immediately drew his pistol. With the last 2 sick closing in, he fired 4 more shots, targeting the remaining threats with stern determination. Twitching his aim over the dead and dying targets, he glanced toward the building to check if the commotion had drawn any more attention. There was no movement. Everything appeared clear. He had done it. Except for the likely trapped sick inside the building, he suspected he had dispatched all threats in the area. He certainly didn't want to stick around to find out. Reholstering his pistol, he quickly grabbed his backpack and swung it on, pausing to listen to the increasing racket coming from the gate. The gunshots had likely stirred the horrors outside. As he walked toward the gate, the hammering and screams grew louder. "One thing after the fucking next," he shouted in frustration through his mask. Spying the ladder leading to the gate overlook, he paused, considering his options. "This is the only way out," he muttered in a defeated, muffled tone. Turning to scan his surroundings for anything that might offer an escape, rope, ladders, or anything climbable, his gaze fell on the military truck parked by the gate. There was little chance it would work. All fuel in vehicles had turned stale about a year ago, along with flat batteries and other issues from neglect. However, since this was a safe zone vehicle, the fuel might have been properly maintained. Even if it did start, he'd likely be driving around Manchester for hours looking for a way out. Still, it could offer a chance to break free. He walked over to the truck and tried the door. It was locked. Moving to the other side, he found the same result. Glancing back at the main building, he muttered to himself, "Forget looking for the keys." Turning his attention to the rear of the truck, he approached the back and peered into the covered cargo area. His eyes adjusted to the dim light, widening in surprise at what he saw. Climbing into the truck, he discovered a collection of about 4 petrol bombs and a jerry can. Picking up the can and giving it a slight shake, he estimated it was about half full. Stale or not, it would still be highly flammable. "This is unbelievable. This could do it," he thought. They must have planned to use this at the gates during the second wave. As he opened the can, it popped slightly as it adjusted to the air. After resealing it, he gathered the bottles, climbed out, and moved to the base of the ladder, ready to begin his ascent. With one hand gripping the jerry can, he climbed the ladder slowly, being careful not to misstep or lose his grip. Heaving himself and the jerry can onto the narrow walkway, he saw a mass of what looked like 20 sick individuals, mainly huddled at the gate. "This is going to be horrific. I just hope it's enough," he thought. He unpacked the petrol bombs and laid them out in a row, opened the jerry can and carefully topped them up, then restuffed them with rags. Standing to face the horde below, he aggressively shouted to draw their attention. "Hey, dickheads! Over here!" As they turned toward his call, they compacted just as he had planned. Heaving the jerry can up to the ledge, he tipped it, showering the mass of black-stained skin and white eyes below with petrol. As the liquid washed away some of the stains, their faces became a little clearer, though he didn't realize how much the residue helped to dehumanize them. He looked away as he emptied the last of the fuel over them. Kneeling back down, he reached into his backpack's pocket where he kept his tobacco and retrieved his lighter. One by one, he lit and threw the bottles down into the crowd. Screams of pain and distress were followed by plumes of smoke. With the final bottle thrown accurately, he reeled back from the rising heat. He heaved his backpack on and retreated hastily down the ladders, rushing back into the truck. He sat down and pressed his hands against his ears through the coverall hood. Minutes passed as the screams gradually faded. "I could really do with a cigarette right about now," he muttered to himself in a somber tone. He knew he couldn't indulge until he went through the decontamination procedure. He waited there, shaken, for the hell outside to calm. About 20 minutes later, he emerged from the truck and made his way cautiously to the gate, stopping to listen. All was silent. Reaching for the highest latch, he clunked it back and paused, ears straining for any sound. Still nothing. He drew his pistol before unlatching the lower bolt, holding the gate shut as he listened one last time. After a brief moment, he slowly but firmly pushed the gate open, revealing a grim sight. The blackened, incinerated forms of the sick littered the street. Scanning left to right for any sign of movement, he began to step out from his temporary prison. Keeping his wits about him, he gradually picked up the pace, stepping over the charred corpses while scanning for any signs of movement. As he made his way up the street, the man felt an odd mix of regret for ever venturing to that dreadful place, and the bitter realization that he'd never had a choice. His thoughts were clouded by exhaustion and confusion. "I need to get moving before the light starts fading," he muttered to himself, pushing forward despite the weight of it all. Navigating through the desolate streets, he made a few familiar turns, heading toward a place he vaguely remembered from a distant visit to Manchester. Stopping outside an outdoor supplies store, he tried the door. "Of course it's locked," he muttered. Reaching round his pack, he firmly grabbed his bat and swung hard, shattering the glass with a loud crash. Pausing, he glanced down at the bat, a tool that had served him well. "We've got to part ways, mate. You'll be crawling with the stuff." With a sigh, he rested it against the doorframe and stepped inside the store. Stepping into the untouched shop, he let out a sigh of relief. The sight of an entire store at his disposal brought a fleeting smile to his face, visible only through the glint in his eyes behind the mask. Snapping himself out of the brief moment of joy, he quickly marched toward the nearest changing room. With methodical precision, he began stripping off his gear, just as vigilant as before, paying extra care when removing his mask and finishing with his latex gloves. This time, he donned a fresh pair and meticulously unpacked his rucksack, placing everything into a neat pile. Once his contaminated clothes were gathered into a separate heap, he discarded the gloves, walked into the changing room, and began the meticulous sanitization process. Hours had passed, and darkness now cloaked the city. The glass door was barricaded with shelving and reinforced by whatever heavy objects he could scavenge from the store. Toward the back, he had settled into a small storage cupboard, his temporary bunker for the night. A faint glow from a camping lamp illuminated the space. Sitting on a fold-out chair, a cigarette in one hand and a map in the other, he muttered to himself, "Well, there isn't any way around it. Literally, I'm going to have to go over the Peak District. At least it's a narrow stretch of moorland." He was in the best possible place to make sure he had everything he needed for the journey ahead. Stubbing out the cigarette, he set the map aside and reached for an opened pouch of meatballs and pasta. After a sip of water, he forced himself to finish the meal. A small pile of empty pouches beside him suggested he'd been loading up on calories while he had the chance. Once done, he crawled into the comfiest sleeping bag he could find in the store, resting atop an inflatable mat. With the lamp switched off, sleep took him almost instantly. The next morning, he was up early, fed and hydrated, feeling surprisingly refreshed, though still haunted by the events of the previous day. His new gear felt solid, and the fresh, comfortable clothing gave him a subtle reassurance for the journey ahead. Before stepping out, He glanced back at the outdoor shop that had been his shelter for the night, feeling a brief moment of gratitude. It had given him safety when he needed it most. As he left the city, it felt like walking through the remnants of a world frozen in time. He passed lines of washing, still hanging, weathered and bleached by the sun and rain, as though waiting for someone to take them down, waiting for life to return. A child's toy truck sat overturned in the street, faded and cracked, as though expecting to be picked up and played with, its owner long gone. It was as if the city's dead still lingered here, trapped between moments, waiting for something that would never come. With his rucksack packed and slung over his shoulder, he pressed on, ready to face the journey ahead, but the weight of the past seemed to cling to him like the silence that surrounded the ruins.